Hello everyone, welcome to this session number 5 in your module Agile and Hybrid Project Management. Today we are going to start a block called Modern Project Scheduling Techniques. And in that session we are going to explain the location-based approach. Basically we are going to cover two objectives. The first one will be to understand this location-based approach to scheduling, and the second one will be to explore the advantages and disadvantages of this new scheduling technique. Well, till now, in this module, we have been focused on activity-based scheduling. We have been learning how to build the work breakdown structure, how to develop the network diagram, to find the critical path, and to build a Gantt chart. All of them are activity-based systems. And as we said in previous sessions, the complexity of real construction projects, which include hundreds or even thousands of activities, could make these activity-based models very complex and difficult to follow. The second limitation of these activity-based scheduling techniques is that these systems don't enforce the use of same location everywhere, and they don't maintain a consistent hierarchy of location. So basically, location is an underestimated factor in activity-based scheduling. So that's the reason because a new approach for scheduling based on location emerges. The location-based planning systems use location as the basic unit of planning and control in projects. In these models, the different activities, the different tasks, are assumed to flow through the locations that has been previously identified. So the logic assumed here is to repeat in each location where the same task exists, which means that the number of logic dependencies is greatly reduced in location-based systems. In terms of historical context, maybe the most famous project that used these location-based scheduling techniques is the well-known Empire State Building in New York. This building is formed of 102 floors and it was built in a record time, only 18 months from sketch designs to the opening. And also, this was a quite successful project that was completed under budget and with a high safety record. The main important concept connected with the location-based scheduling is the line of balance. This concept was originally introduced by Goodyear, which is a well-known tire company, in the early 1940s and was developed by the US Navy in the early 1950s for the programming and control of both repetitive and not repetitive projects. Basically, it was developed for industrial manufacturing and production control. But the basic concept of line of balance can be applied in the construction industry as planning and scheduling method. A line of balance diagram comprises a series of inclined lines which represent the rate of working between repetitive operations in construction sequence. The line of balance is the best planning method for a repetitive work, such as build as units, a set of houses, high-rise building, highways, pipeline, tunnels, railway. However, it may be also adapted for non-repetitive projects as well. The second important concept is the flow line approach. In that case, we are going to represent each task as a single and continuous line. Here you are not going to see steps. This must be a continuous flow of working. It's also important that you realize that now in the vertical axis you will find the location, in that case the different floor number 1, number 2, 3, etc. And on the horizontal axis we will represent time. It's also critical to understand that in this kind of representation, the fastest time is not going to be necessarily the most economical. So we will have to analyze quite in depth the relationship between the available resources and construction time. So as usual in project management, we will have to look at the interdependencies between time, quality, and cost. Some benefits of considering continuous work as a basis for the scheduling in a project is that we will increase the learning effects and productivity. And this will allow us to provide clear directions to the team members. Also, in connection with the relation with subcontractors, we will have a smaller risk of subcontractor crews leaving the project or increasing the cost because of waiting time. So the first step to use a location-based scheduling techniques is to consider the locations by analyzing and deciding the location breakdown structure. In a few words, this is the process to identify independent locations that contain repetitive tasks. As an example, you can imagine a project to build two buildings. In that case, section A will represent one building and section B will represent the other building. And obviously, these two buildings will contain very similar tasks to be built. We can continue the process and identify new locations unit for each floor of the building. So a typical construction project for buildings could be subdivided into structurally independent sections that can be divided to floors and then to interior zones. The important thing, as I said, is that these locations can contain as many repetitive tasks as possible. Now I'm going to explain the process to build the chart that represent the location-based scheduling. As I said, in the vertical X, I will be representing the locations, in that case, the different floors for a building, while in the horizontal axis, I will be representing time. In that case, project duration in months, and here you can see representation for each week. So for the activity A, we are considering that we need 2 weeks per floor. So in 2 weeks, as you can see here, we will finish activity A for the first floor. In 1 month, it means 4 weeks, we will finish activity A for 2 floors. And now we want to represent a different activity, activity B. The rhythm for activity B is 1 week per floor. And there is a dependency because activity B only can start for each floor after activity A has been completed. That's the reason because activity B could start on the second week of the project after completion of activity A for the first floor. As you can see, the slope of activity B is higher than slope for activity A. It means that the rhythm of working for this activity B is faster. So that's the reason because after the completion of activity B for the first floor, we need to wait 1 week before restarting activity B for second floor in order to keep the relation of dependency between activity A and activity B. If we want to start activity B on the second week of the project, we need to consider these stops in order not to cross activity B and activity A, because this would represent a mistake for our planning. So if we want to keep the flow line approach and keep the flow of working for activity B throughout the 5th floor of the building, we will have to delay the start of activity B by 4 weeks. But now, as you can see, we don't need to stop this activity, and this can be run more smoothly. Obviously, the slope for each activity is connected with the complexity of the activity and mainly with the resources that we need in order to carry out the activity. Another solution could be to use less resources for activity B in order that this will adopt a lighter slope more similar than activity A. We will continue practicing on how to draw this diagram in our synchronous activity this week. So now I would like to point out which are the main advantages of location-based scheduling. The first advantage is that through these techniques we will have a better understanding of the amount of work taking place at a certain time in a specific place. These techniques is better to identify how different resources can be optimized throughout the project and how to distribute the resources for a large number of repeated work activities. So, as the information for each activity is more clear in terms of cost and time, we will have better opportunities to optimize the analysis of these two variables. As you saw in the example, it's quite easy to modify, update, and change the schedule. Also, it allows better management of subcontractors and their resources because we can avoid breaks in their activities and we can identify problematic and challenging areas in advance in a much more easier way than with other scheduling techniques. But obviously there are also some disadvantages for these location-based scheduling techniques. The first one is that it's relatively new and unfamiliar scheduling method because its use is not well standard in the construction industry. So this represents a new approach to scheduling and involves new ways to visualize the outcome, and maybe they are ways to visualize the projects that we are not familiar with. Also, the location-based scheduling requires the definitions of location, and this could be a quite challenging activity because we will find different ways of dividing the project into different locations. Another challenge is to what extent define the detail required for the planning, scheduling, and controlling of the project when using this technique. At the end of the day, we will be doing estimations as we used to do for critical path analysis or for building a Gantt chart. So these techniques also reflect the classic project management challenge, which is that the most important decision in that case would be the definition of location will have to be taken when the project in sight is relatively low. We don't have a very detailed knowledge of the project. And a final drawback for this technique is that the critical path is not directly illustrated in this flowline diagram, as you could see clearly in a Gantt chart representation. So here, the rule of thumb is that the slowest task in the flow diagram would be the most critical one. So as a summary, you need to keep in mind that the traditional activity-based methods start from the work breakdown structure, while the location-based planning use location at the basic unit of planning and control. And these different techniques will bring some benefits, but also some challenges that we will have to face. So, maybe the most important aspect is to consider if the project that we are going to manage has a structure in terms of location and repetitive work that make it suitable for using location-based scheduling techniques. Here you have some references and extra readings that you can find in Moodle, and we will practice on these techniques in our synchronous session. That's all from me now. I'll see you in our synchronous session. Goodbye.